Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you once again for joining us for our program today, Native Plants with the Santa Monica Mountain Fund. My name is Jose, and I'm a librarian here at LA County Library. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter today. So with you today is a member of the Santa Monica Mountain Fund, Ms. Carla Gonzalez. Carla, over to you.
I'm really excited to be here and super grateful that you all are taking your time today to participate in this class with us. Like Jose mentioned, my name is Carla Julissa Gonzalez Reyes. I work with the Santa Monica Mountains Fund, and my role is as a nursery assistant manager. Started there about 2 years ago, and it's been life-changing. I love it so much. But we're here to talk about California native plants. Um, Before we get into the topic, I'd like to begin with a quote so that we can understand a little bit of more, not just about California native plants, but also about the land that we're on. So the quote states, "It's important to understand the longstanding history that has brought you to reside on the land and to seek to understand your place within that history. Land acknowledgements don't exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation." So to me, this quote speaks about respect and mutual empowerment. We're currently on unceded land of Chumash and Tongva people, where we continue to see the effects of colonialism on communities of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, whether that's through disproportionate amounts of pollution or attempts at taking away people's sovereignty. It's really important for us to look back on history and reflect, and from that reflection, make a decision on who we want to be in the present and how we want to impact our future for our people and for the places and spaces that we call home. And with that being said, in order for us to understand California native plants and looking back at the history, when we're talking about California native plants, we're talking about plants that were living already in California prior to European colonization, and as such have developed a cultural significance with California native and indigenous people who are the original stewards of the land. They have also co-evolved with the organisms that depend on them for a place to reproduce, find shelter and food. Native plants provide habitat, which is really important and super special to keep in mind, not just for the organisms which depend on them, but also for the people. When we think about how the land has changed over time, we know that there are quite a lot of scars and quite a lot of detachment between the people and natural spaces, because now we have highways and cities and a lot of industrialization. So getting to a place like the Angeles Forest or the Santa Monica Mountains can be quite difficult because you have to make the time, spend on gas, and it's very well worth it, but may not necessarily be accessible to everyone. So if we can invite the plants to be a part of our home, we don't really have to go anywhere to experience how special and beautiful they are and the relationships that they have with pollinators and with ourselves. Looking into the future, we have to consider that California is in a drought, and a lot of what we currently have in our neighborhoods and homes throughout California and the United States is lawns, which come from a Eurocentric idea of having a clean and manicured decorative space. But their monocultures, they totally reduce biodiversity, provide zero functions. They're not special at all. Sorry to say. They're very wasteful because they need a lot of water. A quote from California Department of Water Resources states that a sustainably designed, drought-tolerant native garden can use 85% less water per year than a traditional landscape with turf and high water use plants. So with this mindset, we can go into the future, and we can't do anything about the past. We've had lawns for hundreds and hundreds of years, but going into the future, maybe California native plants is something that we can consider for our places. If you guys are interested in converting your space to a California native plant garden, there are several resources that y'all can look into. Rebate programs basically pay you to get rid of your lawn. So that's a economic incentive, because it's not always accessible to get rid of your lawn if you have to necessarily invest money in other plants. So low cost and effective ways that you can research are included in these links. So there's a turf replacement program that includes informational videos about how to solarize, for example, which would be a way to get rid of your lawn. We're not really going to talk about that in this presentation, but you guys at least have that resource. And then the WaterWise website can take you to the application page for you to apply for the rebate program and see whether or not you qualify. If you're a homeowner, you want to make this decision, this would be the website. Otherwise, I'd encourage you guys to talk with the people who do own the land or might be able to make decisions about removing the lawn. But yeah, this is the application, and tells you what those what the conditions are to be eligible. I'd encourage everybody to look into those programs. They're not always the same for different areas in our communities. All right, now the really exciting part. If you guys want to set up a California native garden in your home, these images that y'all see right here, they're all a little bit of like the before, during, and after in a small area in Cudahy. It is outside my mom's house, where there were quite a bit of weeds. And so prior to even planting in the area, we had to get rid of the weeds. And that was really months and months of hand weeding and years of keeping the weeds in check. But once you are done with the weeding part, what you're going to do with your native plants is you're going to dig a hole as deep as the height of the pot and 2 times as wide as the width of the pot. And then water the hole, plant your plant, make sure that you press tightly. You don't want there to be any air pockets because the roots don't do well in air. That might actually stunt the growth of your plants. So make sure that the soil's tightly packed, and then you can make a little well around your plants, and you're going to give them 2 to 5 gallons of water every 10 days for 3 months. And this is going to help your plants to get established. But after those 3 months, you don't want to give them water for more than, you don't want to water your plants more than 2 times per month. The best planting time is during the rainy season, which is October through March. And given that we're coming in on the summertime, it's really important to remember that in the summer, California native plants don't like deep watering. because they're very used to that seasonal change, right? Very rainy, wet winters, October through March. In the summer, they don't like deep watering. They're used to hot, dry soil. So it's totally not necessary to do a deep watering. If you guys do want to water, you could just do like a light mist in the summertime to help the plants cool down, but no deep watering. And then a really important part, as we mentioned, when we invite California native plants into our home, we are also inviting their own hosts, right? Their pollinators, the insects, the bees, the birds that come and eat the insects. So it's really important that we do not use pesticide, especially if it's for like aesthetic purposes. Like there's a whole community depending on these plants. And if we introduce pesticides, then we might be killing off beneficial insects that, if there are insects that, are eating your plants, you don't really like them. Just trust that there will be other insects or other birds that will come and eat those insects. It's totally fine, like to let them be who they are. So with that in mind, I want to show you guys all of these organisms that my mom and I have seen in the garden since the establishment of the native garden, which is honestly, there's so many more, but I didn't want to overwhelm anybody with a lot of pictures of insects and birds. And but goldfinches, honestly, I had never really seen goldfinches in Cudahy until we set up the annual sunflowers. And it was really exciting to see bright yellow birds coming in and taking the seed. The bee in the middle was really characteristic. It's a sunflower bee, and it has green, like neonish green eyes. You can't really tell from this picture, but they're there and they're gorgeous. And then one day I was just walking outside, taking a look at the plants, saying hello, and I came across the gum plant that you see on the top left corner, and a crab spider had just grabbed a housefly. It was so amazing that I was able to see that and take a picture. So that's just insane. Blew my mind. Crab spiders like to camouflage, and they're just they'll like ambush the prey when they come and try to pollinate the flower. So that was really cool to see. And then there's a hummingbird that has taken over as well. It fights other hummingbirds because it doesn't like them to come into the area. It likes to be the only one enjoying the bladder pod and the hummingbird stage. But I love seeing it almost every day that I go visit my mom. And then the picture of the grasshopper is it's the molten, because insects that in order to get bigger, they basically shed their skin, kind of like a snake, and then they grow their exoskeleton again. So that was also another cool find. And then the caterpillar and the eggs, I don't really know who they might be, but again, super cool to see them in the space. Okay, gophers, we have a lot of them in Cudahy. But, this is their home too. And so it's best not to kill them, not to use rodenticide. Remember that someone else might feed on the gopher, so we would be introducing poison into their body if we poison the gopher. So instead of doing that, because the gopher has visited the garden and eaten so many poppies, what I have found to be really useful is that their nose is kind of sensitive. And, it's something that I read and I was like, wow, is this true or not? I don't know. But doing a little experiment, we put a bunch of sages around poppies, and those poppies didn't get eaten, the sages, anything that's really aromatic, pretty much doesn't get eaten. So if you have a big gopher problem in your yard, but you want to have California native plants, maybe go for the more aromatic species, and that way they'll be safe from the gophers. And they'll like go find food somewhere else. Oh yes, really exciting, you guys. Barbara Chung is this really amazing and special person whom I met because she volunteers at the Satwiwa nursery where we work, and she has only a patio, no yard space, but all of her plants in her home are in pots because she has a patio. And what's really amazing is that a lot of times we think, oh man, like we gotta have land, or we gotta own, or we just have to have access in order for us to be able to invite plants into our home. But you can have plants in your home even if all you have is a small concrete patio. As you guys can see, when I first met Barbara, she told me that she had like 400 plants in her patio space, and I was just mind blown. And most recently, LA Times and CNPS and other orgs have reached out to write about her garden because it's just so beautiful and it still thrives. Still so many birds and insects that come and visit her. So just don't underestimate the power of your choices. You don't have to have land in order to establish a garden in your space. And she has many wonderful talks that if y'all are interested in listening, I didn't have a chance to update all the links, but here are at least two that you guys can look into. So you can listen more about how she started her container garden and how to be successful, because when we grow plants in pots, there are a little bit different considerations than growing plants on the ground. Like the biggest one is you have to make sure that you're going to water them. So I'll talk a little bit about container plants, but if you guys want more details, definitely check out her talks. Okay, so watering your plants in a pot is going to be different than watering them in the ground, like we mentioned. So watering them on the ground, like we said, they don't like deep summer irrigation. That's when we're talking about plants on the ground. If you guys are going to keep plants in a pot, you always have to water them. And that's because they're in a pot, right? Where are their roots going to reach into in order to obtain water unless we provide it for them? And that goes as well for nutrition. We need to provide them with nitrogen, potassium, and phosphate. So that can be found in coffee grounds after you drink your morning coffee, or that could be found in worm castings. So you can fertilize your pots, but you don't have to fertilize your plants on the ground. And then it's really difficult to explain how to water plants in a pot because there's so many variables to consider. So really just think about the place where you're in. Do you live in an area that's a little bit more coastal, or do you live in an area that's a little bit more inland? Because coastal areas have that influence from the fog, so they don't get as hot as inland areas. And because inland areas are a little bit hotter and drier, you probably will have to water them more frequently on hotter weeks than in coastal areas. So you just have to every week be looking at the weather, check out your pot, like, is it dry? Is the soil dry? Does it feel light? Does it feel heavy? When's the last time I watered? And also, like, the size of the pot matters too, right? So in the background, you guys can see a 2-inch, 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch pot, and then a 1-gallon pot. The 1-gallon pot is going to need less water than a 2-inch pot. The 2-inch pot is going to dry out much faster, because it's so small. It has much less soil than a 1-gallon pot. Bigger pots are always going to take longer times to dry out. So maybe you don't have to water the 1 gallon as frequently as you have to water the 2-inch pot. And then the type of soil that you use is also going to be important. If you use soil that is a little bit more porous, maybe it has more rocks, so it has perlite, then that's going to dry up faster than soil that doesn't, because the little rocks create spaces in the soil that cause the water to drain out faster. So if you have poor soil, it'll dry faster, you got to water more. And then the windy days as well will dry out your pots. So similar to if it's hot, then water more. Or sorry, more windy, water more. Yeah. Okay, the really exciting part, you guys. Where can we obtain plants? So recently I learned about Cudahy Seed Library, which has this really amazing program started with Jose Rivera, so that seed could be provided to the community for free. You don't have to have a library card. You can get 2 collections per month, and they have seed of California native plants, but they also have seed of edible plants like corn and different types of beans. So it's really special because you could probably set up your own garden, not just with native plants, but also edible species that, minimize your visits to the store, because you're pretty independent. You got your own food source growing right in your container pots or in your yard space. And then you totally don't have to, but if you have way too much seed and you don't know what to do with it after you grow your plants and they start flowering and seeding, maybe it's time to give back to the community, right? And donate the seed so that other people can also have access to California native plants or to the fruits and grains that are provided by the library. Okay, so let's say you visited Cudahy Seed Library and you got some seeds, or you planted your plants and they bloomed and they put out their seed. What you want to do first is collect your seed when it's mature. So that's usually indicated by the color. On the left, you guys can see the flowers of a golden yarrow, and on the right is the wilted flowers because they already produce seed. So you guys are going to get your seed from the more brownish flower heads that contain the seed. And the seed might be very tiny, so you can see my palm right there, but the seed is so tiny you can't really see it. If you guys are really, really into native plants, or you feel really nerdy and you want to explore some more about like what the seeds look like when they're zoomed in closely, there's a website on the bottom right corner by the California Botanic Garden, which used to be called Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. So if you guys just look up Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, HAZMAC, it'll take you to the website where you can look up the photos of the seed. You just look them up by the genus, and this right bottom picture shows you an up close image. And if you guys really, really get into it, you can also get a jeweler's loupe and then look at the seed a little bit more closely. And the jeweler's loupe is really cheap. It looks like this. It's got a little magnifying lens so that you can see up close. Works for insects too. But I understand not everybody is on the same level and wants to look at seed up close or insects. But you should at least try it once because it's really interesting to see who else is visiting the garden or what the seed looks like. Because you're developing a deeper relationship with the natural spaces around you. Okay, and then the last thing is, if you're not sure if the seed is ready or not, because you can't really see the seed if it's still green, what you can do is just rub your hands very gently, and if you get seed on your hand, then that means that the seed is ready, because it should come off of the stalk very easily. But if it stays, then it probably needs more time. And that's really important because you don't want to collect seed that's immature. It might have less chances of actually growing, and then you also don't want to kill them before they're ready to give their seed to us. Okay. And once you've got your seed, whether it's something that you collected or something you got from the Cudahy library, you're gonna grow it, and you honestly don't have to invest too much. I was able to find some Sunshine Mix #4 from Home Depot. It's basically just peat moss, which is what you see on the bottom left corner. That soil is peat moss. The tray, I got it from OfferUp. I just kind of looked up like propagation trays, and something came up and I got it for like 75 cents. So I got a propagation tray, I got some peat moss, and then what you want to do is you put your peat moss on the propagation tray and you pat it down gently. You don't want to compact the soil too much, but you still want it to be nice and firm, so that when you put pressure on the soil, it doesn't sink very easily. But you want to make sure it's nice and compact. Remember that the roots don't like air pockets, and especially if you're going to have seedlings, it's really important that we take care of them to ensure that they're going to grow. And so once you have your soil nice and compact, you're going to put your seed into the tray. As a rule of thumb, if you are going to sow seed that is really small, leave it over the surface, because seed kind of comes with its own nutrition. The little seed is it's like it has that much nutrition proportionate to the size of the seed. So that nutrition is meant to help that stem push through the soil. So if we bury them too deep, then they run out of their nutrition. They basically die before the stem can reach the top of the soil or push through. So we want to make sure that we don't bury them too deep. If you're not sure, just leave them over the soil, and the roots will eventually find their way into it. The larger seed, like maybe acorns and walnuts, as an obvious example, you can bury it all the way and they will be just fine, because they got plenty of nutrition. And then after you sow your seed, what you want to do is you want to water your tray all the way through. So you should be able to see the water at the bottom of the tray dripping down. That'll be a good indicator that you've watered all the way through. And that's really important because when you're starting your seed and your peat moss, if the peat moss isn't moist all the way, and that goes for soil too, if you don't wet it all the way through, then and you only wet it halfway, soil can become hydrophobic, like it'll repel water, and we don't want that. We want the water to spread out evenly throughout the whole tray, so that if the root does reach the bottom of your tray, there's still water there, right? And it's just a good practice to keep in mind. And for seed trays, we're going to be watering them probably every day. Again, let's look back at the recommendations for container plants. It's pretty similar. Just keep track of the weather, keep track of the wind, where you're living. But you also want to cover your seeds because birds will come in and they'll try to eat the seeds. You can see in the middle picture, there's like a little mesh covering. It's some chicken wire that we folded so that the birds wouldn't take the little seedlings, because they do like to eat the seed. And another really important consideration is leave some food for the birds. We're putting out these plants so that everyone can benefit. So don't collect all of your seed. Leave some seed available so that the birds and the insects can also have their take. Alrighty. So once you sow your seed and you wait about maybe a month, maybe two. It honestly depends on how fast the root systems have developed. So what we generally do here at the nursery is we pull the side of the tray and try to reach our hand underneath so that we don't disturb the roots. And sometimes even without you putting your hand into the tray, you could see how much the roots have developed. And if your roots look nice and chunky, like on the picture on the left, then they're ready for a new home. The roots want a bigger space. So transplant it depending on your root system. If they're nice and chunky like the ones on the left, maybe put them in a 3-inch pot or a 4-inch pot. And that's really helpful because if you maybe have a heavy hand at watering, you won't have the roots sitting in water for a long time and they won't drown in a smaller pot than versus if you put them in a bigger pot and you have a heavy hand, like they'll just be sitting in water for longer, and then we water them more frequently, then we might actually be killing our plants. So it's really important to try to find a nice size for the roots. That'll help us in case we overwater. Yeah, and before you transplant your seedlings, make sure you water your seed tray because they're already going to go into shock, right? When we break off the roots and we transplant them into a new home, it's better that we give them water so that they're a little bit more prepared for that transplant. You also want to prepare the soil that you're going to be using. Like we mentioned earlier, the soil is going to be soil that is dry is going to be hydrophobic. So we don't want to transplant our plants into soil that's dry. We want to make sure that it's nice and moist, but not dripping in water. So we add little water at a time until we're able to make a fist. And if we open that fist and we still see that clump of soil keeping its form, then we know that we've reached a good level of moisture. But again, we also don't want it to be super wet, that it's dripping water when we make that fist, because then again, we go back into drowning the roots in water, right? So just got to find that balancing act. And we transplant our seedlings into the right pot size with the adequate moisture. And once we're done, we got to water them in, just like with the seed tray. Water them all the way through so that the roots have water no matter where they are in the pot. All right, you guys, what's really exciting too is that we're gonna stop by Cudahy Library on May 27th for a native plant giveaway. We're gonna be giving away a variety of plants. Some of them are white sage, hummingbird sage, and bladderpod. We'll try to bring some more like yucca, because they're all really special and just gorgeous plants that have such a amazing relationship with people and with the insects that it'd be really special to be able to invite them into our home. So come over May 27th. We might have between 30 and 50 kits of these particular plants for you all to take home and plant in your home. We'll be there between 10 to 2. If we run out of the kits consisting of white sage, hummingbird sage, bladderpod, or yucca, then what we can do is give you guys milkweed. We were lucky enough to receive a grant for milkweed giveaways. So we have about 25,000 milkweeds that we're passing out within the community in LA and Ventura. But honestly, 25,000 is a lot. So if you guys have a community project, either in school or in a community garden or in your own home, like you have a really big space, you want to have at least 5 milkweed minimum. And so For the milkweed in particular, why it's so special is because it has a relationship with the monarch. The monarch looks for milkweed, and it lays its eggs. The eggs develop into a caterpillar, as you can see on the left bottom, and then the caterpillar eats the milkweed, and that is its only food source. And with the declining populations in monarchs, it's so important for if we want to actively help them, um, then we should be planting native milkweed in our areas. A lot of places sell tropical milkweed, and tropical milkweed does not go dormant. It doesn't go to sleep, just like California narrowleaf milkweed. And so that's an issue because there's a pathogen, has a really complicated name, but it's called EO or OE. And that pathogen's concentration just increases every year that the plant doesn't die back. And so it gets transferred over to the monarchs that visit the tropical milkweed, and that's actually hurting their populations rather than helping them. So native milkweed is really the best way to go, and it's provided to people for free. So you guys take advantage. If you're not able to come in on May 27th for your free milkweed, please come in May 28th or June 3rd. You guys can follow us on Instagram too. We'll continue to publicize dates that we can give away milkweed in the community. Generally, people register first. So let me share the survey with everyone. Generally, people register first. This is what the survey looks like, and so you'll fill this out. Whether you want milkweed or native plants, just fill this out. We'll give away the native plants to the first 30 or 50 people that show up on May 27th. But milkweed, we have so much of it that honestly, anytime you show up, we can give you guys milkweed. But we do ask people to register for the plants first so that we know how many to bring to the events. And I can share this onto the chat right now.
Hey, Carla, yeah, I placed it in the chat twice already,
Oh,
so hopefully
awesome.
people are able to click on that. If not, you'll get an email from me on Monday with that link as well.
Great, perfect. Okay, so yeah, just make sure you register for the native plant giveaway, and then that helps us to be able to provide you guys with as many plants as you want for your community garden or for your home. All right, so do we have any questions?
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for that information. And you know, I love hosting these programs because they're educational for me as well. So it's kind of like, you know, I get to work and learn at the same time. So it's fascinating. But you're right about the hummingbirds. One of our neighbors recently converted their lawn to native plants, and I've seen hummingbirds like go at it. It's brutal. It's like watching a UFC fight or something. They're so small. You think they'd be like so gentle, but they could get very brutal with one another. So we do have a lot of questions, so we'll try to get to as many as we can in the time that is allotted. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today and expressing your interest. And hopefully you're able to, if you're in the area, hopefully you're able to make it out to Cudahy. But if not, you know, there's other opportunities on that form which you could register for and pick up some milkweed. And hopefully there'll be other opportunities to pick up some plants as well. So my first question is, we are coming into the summer months. So can we plant native plants, seeing how you said the best time is October to March because of the weather? So is it still possible to plant in the summertime? And is there anything different that we need to do to ensure the success of these plants?
Yeah, so what's really different is that in the rainy months, we have the rain to help the plants establish, and the plant's already used to the water coming in. In the summertime, it's a little bit more difficult. Not that you can't do it, but it's a little bit more difficult because the plants struggle a little bit more, where it's the summer and they're not used to receiving as much water. What I've seen a lot of people do in order to compensate is that they'll put their plants on the ground and they'll give it extra watering. So rather than doing 2 to 5 gallons um, every 10 days, they'll do it every week um, to help them establish more compensate for the heat in the summertime. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can put it in a bigger pot and wait until the rainy season.
Oh, fantastic. Cool. And if a plant is in a pot, is there any a special attention you need to do to um, for pests? I know you said we don't want to do pesticides, but are they more prone to pests because they might be more separated, or does it make no difference if they're in a pot as opposed to the ground?
Yeah, it doesn't really make a difference unless you're keeping your plants inside, which for California natives, you really don't want to do that because they like full sun, or most of them do. Uh, so yeah, if you keep them outside, then there's plenty of other um organisms that will probably feed on those insects that you don't like. Like the more common one is aphids. People don't really like aphids, but if you leave the aphids alone, the ladybugs will come and they'll that's one of their main food sources. So you get more ladybugs in your garden.
That's never a bad thing, right? Lady, ladybugs and hummingbirds, never a bad thing. Bring them on. So one thing I've noticed, just observing, the change here where I live with some of my neighbors, that sometimes it seems that the plants, quote unquote, die, but then they spring back up in the during their season. So how can you tell if a plant is dormant versus dead?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So like we mentioned with the milkweed, right? Certain plants will naturally, because that's their way of dealing with the harsh environmental conditions, they'll just die back, but they're not dead. They're just going to sleep or hibernating, however it makes more sense to you. They're just going to sleep and they're coming back when the conditions are better. Um, so if they don't come back once the conditions are better, um, then that's how you know they're not coming back, or pretty much they have died. And that could be for many reasons. I had milkweed that I had been waiting for longest, and I think the gophers ate it because it didn't come back. But like just wait, just be patient. Because sometimes it's just a matter of time and they'll wake up. So don't try to um replace your plant before you figure out if it's just sleeping. Just wait a couple months, wait a couple weeks.
Give it like a full cycle, right? When to see
Yeah,
if they spring up. Yeah, don't be quick to the trigger with those hedges, those hedge
right.
cutters. Um, so kind of getting back to planting and the proper time to plant. If you have seeds, what is the shelf life of seeds? Does that make sense? Do you have to plant seeds within a certain amount of time before they're able to propagate? Is there an expiration date for seeds? I guess that's the question I'm asking.
That's a really good question. Well, there's certain seed that doesn't do so well in storage. Like bigger seed like acorns and walnuts, they prefer to just be sown right away. Um, Sunflowers you can probably store, or other smaller seeds you can store. Seeds that don't necessarily have like a chunky food stores for their seed. Um, so it depends on the type of seed, first of all, and then secondly, if you're gonna sow your seed relatively soon, you don't even have to worry about cleaning it super well, because you're gonna be sowing it really soon. But let's say that you want to conserve it for a long time, then you do want to do your best to clean the seed as best as possible, um, because there could be insects eating the seed. So sometimes, like the seed that we collect, it'll be just like a whole flower head, right? And it's closed up like this, but there could be an insect in there. So you want to clean it as soon as possible to make sure that you're checking if there's any insects eating your seed, because that will impact the quality of the seed. Um, and then also, if you're going to store it and it's not really clean, there's the possibility that the seed might get moldy. Um, And so it honestly just depends um, on what you're working with and how long you want to store it for.
Got it. Thank you. And once you're ready to plant, I know with the smaller seeds that you just kind of spread them out, kind of like topsoil, and hopefully you're able to cover them so that the birds don't get to it. But with the bigger seeds where you do need to put them deep in, is there a spacing issue? Like, do you need to give each seed a certain amount of space so they're allowed to grow, or does that not come into consideration?
Space like the size
Like,
of the
yeah,
pot?
or like between seeds, right? Like, so if I put a seed here, can I put a seed right next to it, or do I have to
Oh,
give it like 6 inches, 7 inches? Does it matter?
you mean if you plant them on the ground or in a pot?
Yeah, in the ground.
Yeah, so for that's where it's really important to try to learn about the plants that you will have before taking them home. Walnuts and acorns, they'll produce trees, right? So their roots are going to need a lot of space. You want to try to at least plant them 10 feet apart if you're working with trees. If you have more shrubby plants, like a bush sunflower or a sage, give them like 3 to 5 feet of space apart if you're going to put them on the ground. Um, but there are quite a few resources. You guys can look into Calscape and Calflora. It usually tells you how wide and how tall they're going to get so you can prepare your space for planting.
That's it. Thank you. So I want to get into there's a couple questions about specifically about milkweed and the best way to ensure the success of the plants. So do milkweeds need like all day sun, half day sun? Should they be in the shade or like just fully exposed?
Milkweed is pretty commonly found in grasslands, open spaces without shade, so they do enjoy full sun. They can do just fine in park shade, but I wouldn't put them in full shade.
Fantastic. And do they do well in like high desert where it's hotter and drier, or do they need some humidity?
Um, can you repeat that question?
So like California, like if you think of these in Southern California, like our weather, as much as people say we don't have weather, it varies, right? Like I'm in Long Beach right now, and it's completely overcast and kind of misty. My parents live in East LA in New York, Cudahy, and I was talking to them earlier, and they're like, "Oh, it's so beautiful and bright out here." Um, so that so also we have like little biomes, right? And they change. So does milkweed, does it need hot, dry weather? Does it need humidity? Can it just adapt because it is a native plant?
Gotcha. Darn, that's such an interesting question, and I could let me try not to use the whole time on it, but um, we're our goal is to plant it inland. Um, Milkweed has been found in coastal areas, so it's kind of complicated because it has been found in coastal areas, but you also don't want to plant it in coastal areas because that could potentially um it could potentially impact the migration pattern. So when monarchs see milkweed, they know it's time to lay their eggs. In the coastal areas, there's several overwintering sites. So as they're migrating, they'll stop to find shelter in these overwintering sites. But that's not the time for them to reproduce just yet. They have to get to the inland sites first. Um, so it does it the whether they're coastal or more inland, they it's recommended for them to be planted in more inland places.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, see, I would maybe not milkweed where I live. That's fine. Um, we did have a question about the plants that will be given away, and as far as like, are they big plants? Do they need are you going to need to bring in a big car to carry them with you? Are they in small planters?
Yeah, so maybe I can go back. The size pots that we generally hand plants out to is the 5-inch pot, which is this
Okay,
size right here with the middle one next to the 1 gallon pot. So yeah, you should be able to carry them without like much effort. One person can carry all three. Yeah.
got it. Perfect. So if you have any more questions, please place them in the chat. We got a couple more minutes here for everybody. to get your question in, I do see a question about if you could use egg cartons as a good way to prep your seeds to kind of start off in a egg container. Is that correct?
Wow, that is so creative. Very cool. I don't see why not, you know? It might decompose rather quickly.
Hmm.
Um, so it probably depends on how soon, how long it takes for the plant to grow. Um, it might work, it might not work. Um, yeah, because I don't know how fast egg cartons degrade, but that would be really cool because then you don't have to use a plastic pot.
Yeah. And so kind of combining the two containers and milkweed. Do milkweeds grow well in containers or do they need open space?
They will do fine in pots. Maybe the minimum size pot you probably want to put them in is in a 5-gallon pot.
So,
So the roots have enough space to grow in.
so I see someone commented here to put holes at the bottom. I'm assuming they're talking about the egg carton, so kind of let it drip up a little. So thanks so much for that comment. Pass it along to everybody.
Can if there are no more questions, there's another resource I'd like to share with everybody. Are there any more questions?
There is one, and I'll kind of answer this one. It's talking about turning your sidewalks into native gardens. I think you'd have to talk to your city before doing that. So talk to your city or your local community board. There might be regulations depending on different cities as to how that could be arranged.
Nice. Okay. So there is, remember how we were talking about different resources, you guys? California Botanic Garden, if you go onto their website, you can go onto, where's the seed section? Aha, here it is. Seed conservation, under conservation, and then keep scrolling down. And then under forms, this is if you're really hardcore and you really like just want to learn a lot more. California Botanic Garden has posted publicly their germination data. So when you want to sow seed, there's some seed that won't come up unless you give it a very particular treatment. And that's whether we want to replicate like the winter season. For example, with acorns, they go through a cold winter season before they can germinate. And sometimes if we don't put them through that process, they just won't come up. And so if you're having trouble sowing some seed, and you've tried different methods, maybe look into the germination data spreadsheet, and I'll tell you what they did to try and sow the seed and what worked for them. But it's very technical. This is like, that's why I said it's like if you're really, really curious about different experiments that have been done, this is one resource you can look into. Sometimes plants have to be put through like gibberellic acid to like, maybe for example, for berries and fruit, because that replicates like the berries being inside the stomach of a coyote, maybe, you know,
Wow.
and it has to get scarified inside of their stomach before the seed coat is, you know, scarred enough that they're ready for germination. So growing California native plants isn't just like putting them on the seed tray and then waiting for them to grow. Sometimes they do have to go through a process. Matilda poppies are quite difficult. I believe that they require fire, and I've experimented with that one myself, but I don't know. I tried, you know, putting dry leaves on top of the seed and setting it on fire. That didn't work. And I tried what is this liquid I'm thinking about? Liquid smoke. You can use liquid smoke to replicate the smokiness after the fire. Some seed actually need that. So sowing seed can get a little complicated, but it's really fun because you're just learning a little bit more about what do you need in order to wake up from this dormancy.
Yeah, I mean, we forget that wildfires are part of the natural process in California for germination, and it's it's part of that cycle, and they could be very devastating, but they're also very important to the natural cycle of our native plants.
Right.
So it's interesting to to think about that.
Yes.
So you have talked a lot about. I have one more question here that came in. You have talked a lot about plants that need sun, but if you are in an area that doesn't necessarily get a lot of sun, or you're kind of more in a patio that has a lot of shade, are there plants that are more successful in shade?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hummingbird sage is great. It does uh like to grow under oak trees, um, which provide a lot of shade. So hummingbird sage is a really good plant. If you have a very shady area, they like that. They can take the full sun, but they won't be as happy. And like a lot of canyon plants, tend to like shadier areas. So that's like native ferns, maybe. Um, we have plants that like California wild rose. They tend to grow near streams. So if you have an area that tends to get irrigated a lot, maybe plant some juncus or California rose. Snowberry too, for shadier areas. So think about plants that grow like in canyons or near creeks. They tend to be a little bit shadier and more wet. Those are great alternatives for shadier areas.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. So we are coming up here at the top of the hour, and I want to respect everybody's time. I know it's Saturday, and I know I said it's gloomy here, but I still need to get out. Um, so I want to thank everybody for giving us a moment of your time, and hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully you're able to make it out to Cudahy if you're nearby. If not, take advantage of some of the other giveaways that the Santa Monica Mountain Fund is putting together to help move us more towards a California native plant gardens.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Jose. This was great. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. It was amazing to share this time and space with you.